Let's make it again. This time we're going to record with a tape recorder.
Brad?
Here we go.
Brad,
yes.
You want me to lay out again after that instrumental break and then come back into the fours toward the end, like before
We
C?
may have you wail on that, baby, for the instrumental break. Here we go. This will be what?
Take two.
She's somehow closer now. Darker shame, darling, darker shame.
Strangers in the night.
Alvin! Los Angeles.
5:00 in Los Angeles.
Would you like to ride in my beautiful balloon?
The Wrecking Crew was the focal point of the music. They were the ones with all the spirit and all the know-how, and especially for rock and roll music.
In the hardcore producing area, everybody knew what went on there. I mean, everybody knew that the best musicians played on all the sessions, but we as the general public didn't know. I had no idea that certain people didn't play their own records until the Monkees came along.
They played so well, and they played so well together. I think they were so into that. They all respected each other, and they all would sit and, talk in between takes and hang. I mean, it was a social event for these guys, too.
What was nice about that unit was that they played together a lot. And so they were an established groove machine. They knew each other. So you could really count on what they had to offer.
That's life.
We played on everybody's. The Lazy Crazy Hazy Days of Summer album with Nat King Cole. It was the same guys doing that was doing the Beach Boys.
The musicians were really the unsung heroes of all those hit records.
When I listen to the record, it is so apparent that these guys were just really so good. And you can see why everybody used them, because they were so tight.
They were the stone-cold rock and roll professionals, and there may never, ever be a group of rock and roll musicians of that caliber again.
Are you ready, Boots? Start walking.
The chances are you didn't know his name, but it's likely you sang and hummed along with his music. Famed studio guitarist Tommy Tedesco has died.
I'm Kurt Loder with an MTV News Brief. Tommy Tedesco is arguably the king of Los Angeles session guitarists.
You probably never heard his name or heard him speak, but listen, he is someone you've heard before.
He was featured in the theme to Bonanza, in Batman.
The Chores.
The Stars.
Tedesco died of cancer Monday at his home in Northridge, California at the age of 67. While his name may not be immediately familiar to everyone, some aspect of his music almost certainly is.
Here's the irony. You spend your whole life playing guitar, creating guitar licks that people all around the world recognize, but nobody knows your name until you're dead. And then, even in the end, they misspell your name and call you
Tony Tedesco
instead of Tommy. Tommy was not only a legendary guitarist, he was my father, and he was also a member of an elite group of studio musicians. So what follows is the story of my father and his extended family, the Wrecking Crew.
Hondels, Marquettes, Routers. We'd cut the tracks and the records, and then they'd form a group to be that group.
People were really not focused on the long, drawn-out album recording
sessions.
4 songs in 3 hours. It's only a certain group of guys can do that.
A lot of the recording came out here. That's when you had an influx of a lot of New York musicians. That was in the mid-'60s when it started flowing out here. But then it became a flood around that time.
This led to a surge of work for the LA studio musicians. Not all of them, but a small group who later became known as the Wrecking Crew.
Twisting the night away. Here they have a lot of fun. Putting trouble.
It wasn't an organized band of musicians that set out to take over rock and roll. And I can't tell you exactly who was part of this hit-making machine. Even the musicians that were part of this scene couldn't come to an agreement.
12, 15 people.
Maybe, what, 20 of us?
30, maybe?
There was probably 20 musicians, or maybe a few more counting the string players, of course, that were doing all the sessions.
They were a product of like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And they were great musicians who came of age when rock and roll came of age. And here they are at the height of their physical powers with all of this talent. And they're in the right place, and it's the right time. And so they get to do this.
On the first day of shooting, I brought 4 of LA's greatest session players together. Carol Kay, Plaz Johnson, and Hal Blaine, along with my father. It was probably the first time that all 4 had been in the same room in about 20 years.
Wait! All you have to do is just get sick. Rolling.
You know, all the guys that had been in the studios, God bless them all, for 20, 30 years, they all wore the blue blazers, the neckties, and there was no talking, no smoking, and no nothing. And we came in there with Levi's and T-shirts, smoking cigarettes, whatever, weird. Yeah. And the older guys were saying, they're going to wreck the business. You know, they are going to wreck the music business.
You didn't have the respect that the older guys had. Remember the older studio players, Barney Kessels and the Lloyd Elliots, all these people?
Well, that's how that whole Wrecking Crew thing came in.
Even though the term The Wrecking Crew gained popularity with rock historians, many of these musicians never heard the term until years later.
I think Hal Blaine is the first one I heard it from.
Yeah.
He probably came up with the name.
I think it kind of evolved, really.
There was-
First time I heard the name, I think, was at the Baked Potato when they had that get-together. They used the expression, the Wrecking Crew.
Well, it was used before that. It was used while we were recording.
And the definition of who was a member of the Wrecking Crew, there really isn't any definition.
Between the engineers, producers, and musicians themselves, each has their own take on how this all went down. Together, they form a snapshot of a time that will never be repeated.
Anybody could do 5 or 6 different things on as many different instruments also.
There were a lot of producers at that time that were not really musicians, so these guys were able to decode.
He's talking about me, by the way.
No, I mean, there were some producers that really just, didn't really know the musician's language, and these guys were able to just quickly interpret it.
The people we're talking about played for so many people in so many different styles. That's a fascinating thing. They could walk into a pop sound and play it. They could do rhythm and blues. They could do soul music. I guess they could have done classics if they'd had to. But they had the magic touch.
We injected a lot of ourselves into it because we were experts at doing it. We were doing it all the time. A guy would give us a lead sheet or something, and we know what the song was. We made up a lot of arrangements and so forth on that set, ourselves on those things.
Here's the way that the beat goes on, sounded when we first heard it. La-di-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da. I said, uh-oh, we need to pull a rabbit out of a hat for this one. It was our job to come up with riffs and stuff. So about the third line I came up with was da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. And Sonny loved it, and he gave it to Bob West, the bass player, to play it, and both of us are playing it throughout the tune. And without a good bass line, the tune doesn't pop, it doesn't snap, like a big hit record.
the beat goes on.
I've always said they put notes on paper. They put notes on paper. But that's not music. You make the music. What do you do with the notes? What do you do with the charts? What do you do with the chords?
Other than that, they can call a union for a guitar.
That's right. So it's what you put into it. Because how many days, in fact, we're all here.
It's what you put into it that's not written.
Yeah. Well, in fact, everybody that's sitting here, I remember doing different things that weren't ever even thought about, and then all of a sudden become part of the record and part of the signature.
We all used to produce our own parts.
Oh, yeah,
it's that simple.
To make it swing, yeah.
The first thing that I ever did that smacked of any kind of rock and roll was some kind of date, which I don't even know who the artist was. There wasn't a minor seventh chord in a bushel, you know, it was all pretty vanilla. So I knew something was different.
At the time, I was doing the Ozzie and Harriet TV show. Then all of a sudden, I'm doing the show, and then one day they come up with Jimmy Haskell comes up with Ricky Nelson said, we're doing this rock and roll stuff. I don't know what they're talking about. Just laid out a chord sheet and says, play behind Ricky Nelson. So pretty soon you ended up, we were starting to get involved in this.
Open up your heart and let this fool rush in.
That's what took me to L.A. in summer of 1960 to play in the Ricky Nelson Band. Working with those people like that was a perfect showcase for what would happen later, which I had no idea that I would ever be the session player. Didn't even know what that meant.
We learned how to play rock and roll right there on the job. Hey, you know, if they want this, I can do it. You know, that's Latin music. That's nothing, you know. You can do that all day long.
There were some purists, like there is in every way of life. Some people will not compromise.
Not that they couldn't, they wouldn't most of the time permit themselves to, you know, they felt that they were at a certain level and playing rock and roll was perhaps a little bit beneath them and they didn't want to get into it, whereas our guys, we welcomed the rock and roll.
They didn't play that shit. They didn't know about it. They didn't like it. And I started out playing demos mainly, you know, $10 a song, and I got to eat that day. And
I had 3 kids to earn a living, and that's it. And the money was important to pay the rent. And so I did what all the rest of the guys did. I got a Fender guitar and put the light gauge strings where you could bend them from here to Christmas and listen to some of the people that were doing this in the rock groups. And I got so I could play that stuff better than they could.
The very first call I had ever had at Disney, we got there 11:45, and all the Blue Blazers were leaving. And we're all sitting there, and he makes a little speech about, ladies and gentlemen, we brought you in here because in this particular film, we're going to do a little, some of your rock and roll music.
Your rock and roll music.
Yeah, there's a little scene here, and we're going to show it to you. And it was a quick little scene. So he says, now we have all the music for you. It's there in front of you. And we're going to do this to what we call a click track. Like we didn't know anything was going on. We're going to run the click very slow so that you can all learn, study, and memorize this music. And then he said, Marianne, play the click much slower. Well, she accidentally hit it, and the minute we heard 8 clicks, ding, 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 we're in, and we played this thing front to back. And when we finished, this guy said, how in the, you did it perfect, I wish we'd have made that.
Made it.
How in the world could you do that? And Tommy said, well, we practiced a lot during the day.
It was perfect, because they thought you were a complete idiot.
It was unbelievable.
Most of the music and the money, I was about to say, was a Freudian slip, but true. Came out of the Brill Building in New York. It was New York-based, New York writers, New York singers, New York musicians.
The music business was in New York City, period, at that time.
Rolling, Master A, take 1. Here we go, rolling.
say, Chess Records back in Cincinnati. But there were only maybe one guitar player, one bass player, one piano player, so they could almost get held up by those one or two guys. Where they could come to Los Angeles, and it wouldn't matter if they could call a matter of 10 or 12 different guitar players, and all of them would be equally as good to do what they wanted done. Plus, we had more studios out here.
A lot of the musicians that were back east and in Nashville, a lot of them came out here to seek their fame and fortune. This was an untapped place for new artists to record, too.
Lee Hazelwood told me he went back to New York to do a session, and he just kind of walked over to the guitar player and said, "Hey, could you play me this little thing?" And the guy said, "Write it out." And the guy just refused to experiment and try anything. Like, if it wasn't written out, he wouldn't play it. You had young musicians who were willing to contribute and come up with ideas, you know, and I think that was the difference.
I don't think it's any secret. The 60s called all of the music to the West. LA was the place to be. If you wanted the best, they were right here in Los Angeles.
I wish they all could be California. Wish they all could be California.
It was a rougher, looser sound than what was coming out of New York. Having a lot to do with, I guess, the musicians that we were using, because they were fresh to the sound.
Beach blanket, bingo. That's the name of the, that's the name of the, that's the name of the game. Bingo!
How you started the surf, and Earl started that double time, you know, because we were bored. We go tune go boom go tune go boom. Oh yeah, tune tune do 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 do. You know, we doubled it up and made it swing.
Yeah, it was sort of like East Coast, West Coast jazz. There was really a distinct difference, and for those years, the record producers chose the West Coast.
Yeah.
And the hits started coming out of here.
This is where the youthful movies were being made. Everybody wanted to be a surfer, whether you were white or black or lived in the middle of the desert. You wanted to have a surfboard. It was crazy. And along with that came young music, and it was created here.
Beach beauties everywhere, and art lovers willing to look. This is paradise for thousands of sun worshippers, Californians by birth or adoption.
And I remember the perfumed air, the night blooming jasmine, and all the kind of plants that grow in Southern California, and how dreamy it all was. It was the sound of the Beach Boys kind of wafting from house to house, you know, almost the same records just repeating. And the idea that, hey, this is real, this is the culture here, is this beach thing.
The Beach Boys! Thank you very much. Right now we'd like to show you how the Beach Boys go about making a record. We start with Denny Wilson on the drums. Followed by Al Jardine on rhythm guitar. Helped out by Carl lead guitar Wilson. And filled out instrumentally by our leader, Brian Wilson, on the bass. When we're ready to sing, we step up at the microphones, and it comes out something like this.
I went to Gold Star, and I met the musicians who played for Phil Spector, and I immediately had Steve Douglas start booking, they're called the regulars, the Wrecking Crew. They started booking them for me in my studio in Western.
Session players were brought in by producers for a variety of reasons. In fact, most of the mid-1960s Beach Boys backing tracks didn't feature any of the Beach Boys. It was Brian Wilson's decision to push the music to another level. And to do that, he enlisted the best of LA.
We were on the road 150 days a year. Brian was getting a little bit more complex in his arrangements. And it just got to be too difficult to coordinate our itineraries. And that's when the Wrecking Crew stepped in.
When I heard that some of the guys sat in for some of the Beach Boys, that surprised me. But in truth, at that point, the Beach Boys were Brian Wilson. He created it all.
He was very self-assured, very much in control. He brought in the charts that he wrote himself. And most of the time, I mean, the music was entirely his. I mean, there were very few times that we made up licks on his stuff.
He had in his head what he wanted.
First album was Summer Days and Summer Nights, the Beach Boy album. Ray Pullman was a great bass player, really good. Steve Douglas was like so on the mark as a saxophone player. He just blew my mind. He played with such finesse, you know, and he used to get real close to the microphone to get the best benefit of his instrument. They were all, the record, they were just great.
Brian was a genius. I mean, he was just... He was as good as I've ever seen, I believe, about putting things together.
Western studio, and there was probably 15, 20 guys in that studio. He'd start at the first guy, and he'd sing them their part till they got it, and then the second guy would sing their part, and the third guy, all the way around the room. And he'd go back to the first guy. Well, the first guy had forgot his part, and he'd sing it again, sing a second. He taught the whole thing by rote, and all of a sudden that whole band could play that shit. I mean, Brian is, when you want to talk about genius, he's, there's not any more like him that I know of. I mean, he's unbelievable.
Pet Sounds was an incredibly important record and still stands there like, okay, top this, you know. George Martin told me Sgt. Pepper was an attempt. He said an attempt to equal Pet Sounds. So it was an incredibly influential record, and I think it had an electromagnetic field, and people were drawn here and wanted to be a part of that and wanted to make records like that.
Good Vibrations.
That's right.
We must have did 25, 30 sessions.
It might take 6 months to do
Some days that we worked 5 minutes, some days we worked 4 hours.
On the same song.
We experimented, and they would ask me, well, what do you want? And I'd say, well, I don't know, you know. And we'd go home, and the next time we get together, then we would fall together, and we'd do the thing.
3 months, 2, 3 dates a week, but Capitol Records was picking up the tab.
And we liked to work for him. The word was, do you have the date with Brian Wilson tomorrow? I said, yeah, I do. Oh, good.
Well, Carol played on Good Vibrations and California Girls, and she was like the star of the show. I mean, she was the greatest bass player in the world. And she was way ahead of her time. She would play a tonic and a fifth or a third instead of a fifth. You know, she was one of the first bass players to start playing that way.
But he definitely wrote out some neat lines on the bass, like, for instance, I'd have never played that. I'll just go into this. Now, that's a jazz walking line. You knew that this kid was into something really, really great.
The room had a spirit to it, with Hal being the leader, you know, and all the guys working together and thumping and pumping.
He would get things like he wanted to hear them, and when he got them that way, it was good. When I heard Good Vibrations the first time on the radio, it just blew me away.
Takes my eyes, she's somehow closer now. Softly smile, I know she must be kind. In her eyes, she goes with me to a blossom room.
I remember Carol, though, I still have to remember, because her favorite thing, no matter what date we went on, after, would you like me to use my Beach Boy pick? And so she'd press the shit out of this one.
She picked it up on the way to the studio.
And they're looking at this pick, and they're looking at her. She was selling this shit like I couldn't believe. One little pick made this girl hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I was very jealous of the guitar when we were first dating and got engaged, and he paid a lot more attention to the guitar, I felt. So I gave him an ultimatum, it's me or the guitar. And he said, honey, the guitar doesn't have legs, you do. He got so upset with him, I took my ring and I threw it at him. Then I went looking for it.
And I was one of these late starters in life. I wasn't one of these guys that you read about in the books. You know, you read these articles in Guitar Player magazine, the guy says, well, when I was 12 years old, I had the chops of a reindeer and all this stuff. You know, when I was 12 years old, I was playing marbles myself. I don't know, you know. And when I was 24, I was at Douglas Aircraft, you know, moving boxes and trying to play guitar. I was 24, I was still into this. Wow, I'm in a 7th position. Whoa, yeah. And I finally learned one hip chord. Whoa. So I'm not one of them guys you read about.
We went to the prom and Ralph Martiri was playing the dance and found out that their guitar player was leaving that night. And he tried out, auditioned, and he was hired right then and there. It was on a Friday night, and a Saturday night he left for New York City.
Tell the truth.
Okay, he got let go. Martiri was going to get a guitar singer so that he could only pay for one guy. He decided he knew there was nothing there in Niagara Falls for him. He wanted to go to California to play.
While my father struggled to find work playing guitar, he had to make ends meet working in a warehouse. He always said it was the best job he ever had. He hated it so much it made him practice every day.
I was told by 2 guys before we left, he's never going to make it. So after 7 months of struggling here, Daddy wanted to go back. And I said, there's no way, because I wasn't giving in to those 2 guys. And that's what Dad said, my stubborn Sicilian wife.
In fact, my wife was behind me 100%, like all the time I work, and you'd swear she was working. She took the calls, she never complained. I would come in at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock. I'd see my kids whenever. My wife accepted it. This was our living. Our whole family took it exactly that way. Every once in a while, a musician's wife would come and complain to her, and she'd talk to them. She'd say, well, look, that's his living.
Well, Carmi never talked to Barbara the Barbarian.
My father would say there are only 4 reasons to take a gig. For the money, for the connections, for the experience, or just for fun.
I got to tell you a story about your dad. We were in Western Studio 3 there, and Jan Barry, Jan and Dean, he counted the song. Everybody ready? Okay. Tedesco started playing. And Jan said, stop, wait. He went over and looked, and he said, Tedesco, what are you doing? Tommy, the music was upside down, and Tommy was reading it backwards. Now, that's a true story. But you talk about getting a laugh out of it. Tommy was a cut-up.
And when you walk me home, they do run, 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 they do run, run. Every evening when the sun goes down, woo, 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 I lay my head. Darlene.
There was an energy that Philip would get. I remember Philip would be so excited about every session. There was just a vitality in the room that would lift you off of your feet. And also, there'd be so many players, and the sound would be so huge. I mean, it was definitely that wall of sound was really there. I never was in the studio that there were any different guys. It was the same guys always.
Sound was the Gold Star Echo Chamber.
Well, it was wall-to-wall musicians, first of all.
Yeah, that's true.
Most people used a 4-piece rhythm section. He had 4 guitars, or 6 or 7. There were 4 pianos always, 1 upright bass, 1 Fender bass. I mean, there was only 1 drums usually. 15 people playing percussion instruments.
In a very small room.
Yeah.
Not a small room, but an average room.
And a huge echo chamber that Gold Star was famous for.
Ceramic,
that was the wall of sound.
Ceramic walls.
1, 2, 3. Every evening when the sun goes down, whoa, whoa, whoa.
The wall wall of sound of Phil Spector is more like a lost feeling. It's heavy on you've lost that love and feeling. And it was he used the echo so much, and it was swimming all the time. In spite of the baffles, we all leaked into each other's mics, just enough to give it the combination of leakage and echo. Plus, we were tired. By the 30th take, you're tired, you know. So it had a real relaxed feeling on his hits.
You lost that love and feeling, now it's gone, gone, gone. Whoa.
It's the most played song of all time.
Oh, I believe it.
Most played record of all time.
They were the whole sound that Philip had. Philip was also really, really superstitious, and he wanted those guys, and he always wanted those guys, you know? He felt secure, only secure when he was playing with those guys.
Same musicians, same engineers, same studio, same probably brand of tape.
Yeah, probably. It was just a thing that he figured if he didn't do it that way, it wouldn't be a hit.
He was probably right.
He was probably right, and we're grateful for that.
You know, Philip was walking in a different universe than everybody else, and so in his mind, it was all him, you know, and the guys were just some sort of an extension of what he couldn't do.
Phil would never record anything for the first 3 hours. I mean, he worked these guys so that they weren't playing individualistic. They were too tired. And so they just melded into this wall of sound.
Phil leaned on Howard very, very heavy about how to play, and just kept on it and on it and on it, and wasn't satisfied or something, and made him kept playing over and over and over and over again for hours until Howard's hands were just a massive pain. No, 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 this way. Howard says, look, man, if I can't play it, and you know what it is, why don't you play it?
Howard Roberts, the only guy that I ever saw walk out of a session where he just put everything down, picked up his guitar and his amp, and he walked out. He said, I've had enough of this.
He was very demanding. I had no problem with Phil. I guess it's because he knew that I always knew that I wasn't the original drummer, because if I'd had a problem, I'd have walked out. Who was he going to get? He'd already, you know, had his argument with Hal. Maybe Hal wouldn't have came back. So we got along fine.
They made fun of him all the time, but they really liked him. I think they really respected him. They thought he was nuts, which of course he was. But I think they always looked forward to it because it was always going to be something really cool. It was like a total friendship thing, too, because they would come in and they would be talking about, you know, what'd you do on the golf course, or, you know, someone had this car, or something. There was always a Mad magazine, too, being passed around that somebody brought, you know.
I was in awe of them because of Phil Spector. That it took me a couple of times to get used to, you know, being with the guys, you know.
Any memories of Be My Baby the first time you heard it?
Oh, I pulled my car over the side of the road and said, what am I listening to here, you know? I couldn't believe it. I instantly wrote Don't Worry Baby after I heard that, yeah. I was so inspired, I couldn't believe it.
By the time we got to River Deep Mountain High, we all thought that was going to be a giant of a hit. There's another Wall of Sound hit, but it flunked. It was a big hit in the UK, but in the USA it was his first downer. And it's like, okay, that style is going then. It's a Wall Sound was over then.
One of the boys, one of the boys.
One of the guys, yeah.
If sexual harassment suits were in there, she'd be 7 millionaires right now. After what we put her through, she'd have all the lawyers working for against us.
I don't think anyone ever really felt that she was a woman, and I don't mean that detrimentally.
No, we were musicians.
Yeah.
Everything was music really.
Yeah. Worse than that would have been shutting her out and not sharing the camaraderie.
was the only one I had to really palm mute to get the treble out. So you can hear that. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I did, yeah. And it's Earl Palmer on drums on that one. I heard music as a kid because my mother was a professional piano player. She played in back of the silent movie houses, and my dad was a trombone player. He played Dixieland bands, things like that. So I heard music all the time. If they didn't fight, they played music. So you knew where it was coming from. My mom and I were living in this housing project, but my mom saved up her pennies, and there was a steel guitar salesman that came around and about 3 or 4 lessons for $10. So she opted for that, and I was about 13 then. About that time, I started playing gigs on guitar. And little Latin things. So it was a lot of great experience. That kind of stuff, heavy-duty jazz, and it was fun, and I was playing a lot in the black clubs, and very accepted, too, by the way. I had made a name for myself. There were a lot of women around that played jazz and were in pop bands of their own, so it wasn't that unusual. But most women back in those days, in the 50s, would play until they got married. It was more important to have a Mrs. in front of your name than it was to have a career.
Let me tell you about a place somewhere up a New York way where the people are so gay, twisting the night away.
Then the chance came to do studio work in late 1957 for Sam Cooke, and I never heard of Sam Cooke, but they were short a guitar player. As soon as I did my first date with Sam Cooke, I got more money in 3 hours work than I did in the whole week's work of my day job, except it got more than 2 dates a week. They wanted our particular group of people to cut the hit records because we got good at it. Ray Pullman had a great sound. He was the very first electric bass player playing hits from about 57 on. I'd say that he did maybe 85% of the hit records. But Ray Pullman got to be the musical conductor for the Shindig Show about the same time I accidentally got on bass. So there's a big hole there. People ask me all the time about being a woman in a man's world. I felt equal with the rest of the guys, and they felt it too. Sometimes they got a little testy. They'd say, oh, you play good for a girl. Yeah, and you play good for a guy, too. I love musicians and the humor and the way that they play, and they all knew that. And I think it was like a sister, having a sister there. I had my 2 kids and my mom to support by that time. We would do 3 or 4 dates a day, and I'd manage to get home to have dinner with the kids. That's the only thing I regret, is that I didn't spend more time with the kids. But they were very well taken care of, and they had good lives, you know. Most of the time, they were fine.
You know, after looking at my father's work logs, I came to realize he wasn't around as much as I thought he was. But when he was home, his focus was on his family. He was one of the few studio guys who found the balance between working crazy hours and maintaining a pretty decent home life. The truth is, I don't know how he did it. Time was money, and you wouldn't last long in any studio if you couldn't keep up.
Studio musicians in this town were really looked up to and respected. We were treated like our life depends on you guys.
Well, they were real session players. They were guys that were going from gig to gig, you know, playing on all the good music.
Gosh, there were so many things went on then. We were so busy. I mean, we would go from one to the other to the other.
We used to call going from session to session dovetailing.
Jesus, when you leave the house at 7 o'clock in the morning and you're Universal at 9 till noon, now you're at Capitol Records at 1, you just got time to get there, and then you got a jingle at 4, and then we were on a date with somebody at 8, and then the Beach Boys at midnight, and you do that 5 days a week. Jeez, man, you get burned out.
At one time, we did an album in a day for Liberty Records. 5, 6 weeks in a row, we do an album a day. 6 tunes in the morning and 6 tunes in the evening.
When all the guys realized that we were doing most of the dates, said, we'll get Scale or you'll get somebody else. And Of course, they didn't, because that was the tightest rhythm section I believe I've ever played with.
I would not go in a studio if I didn't have Tommy Tedesco, Hal Blaine, people of that nature. I just wouldn't go into a studio until they weren't busy, but they were busy all the time.
No matter which producer I worked with, whether it was Lee Hazelwood or Snuff Garrett, they all used the same musicians. They were all just the best. If they couldn't get the guys, they didn't book the date. They'd wait until the guys were available.
Which was wonderful.
Of course, their wives never saw them.
I don't know how those guys could have worked anymore unless they didn't sleep at all.
If you want to be successful in this business, you never say no until you're too busy to say yes. And I learned that by watching guys who talked themselves out of careers by saying, nah, it's not good enough. I'm going to wait till such and such and so and so. Because if you wait at home for the phone to ring, it won't.
If you're a freelance musician, you can't turn nothing down because there's somebody standing right behind you who is salivating to do this work.
One day I get a call from Ernie Freeman. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning. Hi, Tom. I need a guitar player here at United. How long will it take you to get there? I said 20 minutes, which, you know, is a lie. It's going to take an hour. But once I made my commitment, they got to wait for me, right?
That's right.
So when I go up there, I did my date, and he loved it. And then he tells me, you won't believe what Bill Pittman said. I called Bill and asked him, can you come down? I'm stuck. How long will it be? Bill says, well, I'm having breakfast. I should be finished in about 45 minutes, and I'll be there in an hour and a half. And if anybody ever figured Bill Pittman out, that was a Bill Pittman. Straight life, not thinking, and I'm the opposite. Like, what will work right now?
Now it's time for another take for what probably will be another smash hit in the wondrous world of Sonny and Cher. Sonny himself writes most of the songs he and Cher record, and the musicians often work with a couple, and they're excellent sight readers. Today, they're recording several songs that will be part of an album called The Wondrous World of Sonny and Cher, the second album they've made together. Now they're ready to record. The engineer is set, and they call take one.
Were you ever intimidated by the guys?
No, I was too stupid to know. Well, I was kind of shy of everybody. First of all, they were a lot older than me, too. I mean, the first session I went to, I was 16 years old. And I'd never been inside a recording studio. You know, I just didn't want to step any place I wasn't supposed to step, which I thought was everywhere. And they all knew each other. They were really relaxed. I mean, everybody was nice to me. I really don't think I knew for a long time just how great they were. And then later, when I would meet other players who would ask me, you know, was I ever on a session with any of these guys?
There was a lot of honesty in those records, and that's why a lot of them were hits.
When I thought of the music, I thought I was a 13-year-old trying to learn how to play music. Every time I play, you know, there's all them hits that was on the Marquettes, routers, all them solos I did. I brought myself back. I said, how would a kid play this that's so stupid, that doesn't know what he's doing, and play that? I did that shit, didn't know what I was doing, Ben didn't know, didn't care, awful, out of tune. What is this tune? Beatles, Cockroaches, I had no idea. I didn't know them kind of names then.
Well, my personal feeling about the music was that it was all wonderful and I was making millions of dollars. Period.
I didn't give a damn if Tommy liked it or not. I didn't make it for him. Like the artist, you tell Cher. Said she didn't like it. Well, I didn't make it for her anyway. I made it for people to buy, not for Cher to listen to. She never listened to Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves or any other record I made with her. Again.
As Diamond Ring. We cut that record, and I said, oh, my God, I hate this shit. 2 weeks later, it was number 10 or something. So I have to give it to Snuff in terms of certain kind of pop awareness. He had it, but it was not exactly my cup of tea.
The music that we cut in the 60s, nobody thought that was going to last like past 10 years. In fact, Bill Pittman says, when we're doing a chugga 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 date, he says, can you see the kids dancing with their wives 20 years from now saying, darling, they're playing our song?
I remember coming home from a session one day, and it was just one of those 3-chord sessions, and sitting there playing rhythm guitar. There's not much you can do. Just do it, get your money, and go home. And I remember coming home, and I was not in a good mood. I said to my wife, I could do this when I was 14 years old. And she said, yeah, but not nearly as well.
I didn't care for rock and roll that much. I was basically a jazz drummer. But I realized that I'm making my living off it. If I'm going to continue to do that, I got to play that like that's my favorite music. Well, that's not professionalism to me. It's not beneath you if it's supporting you. If it's beneath you, don't play it.
I actually enjoyed it because when I heard the records on the radio, I realized really what an incredible sound that group of people had.
A little less conversation, a little more action. All this aggravation ain't satisfaction in me. A little more bite, a little less spark. A little less bite, a little more spark. Close your mouth and open up your heart. Make it satisfy me. Satisfy me, baby.
Capitol Records right up here. God, the streets are so friggin' torn up, it's unbelievable. This is where we used to do all the, Glenn Campbell's records and Ray Anthony and everybody, man. Peggy Lee, Nat King Cole. We did everybody down in the bowels. Pretty amazing.
As soon as we got in those studios and we found out that this made a lot of bucks, it said, hey, man, we don't have to go on the road. We can stay home with our kids,
Unfortunately, I didn't. I went through 6 wives.
Yeah, but that was because of your personality, not your playing.
No, I had 2 major marriages, and they both fell apart because I was in the studio too much.
I think it's a very hard balance.
Yeah, it was tough. When I got out of the Army, I took my GI Bill, went to Chicago, went to a percussion institute. I was going to school from about 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and then I was playing strip clubs from about 8 at night to 4 in the morning, which was pretty wild. But it was great sight reading training. So you got all these new women coming in dancing, throwing this music at you, and you had to read it immediately. It was great training to relax you and to play, because to this day I can sit down, you can throw any kind of music in front of me, and I will, it might be the hardest thing in the world, but I'll be completely relaxed through it and nobody will know that inside I'm saying, holy cow, this is really something. So there was a lot of great basic training going on while I was there, which really was preparing me for the studios. I wound up at the nightclub in Hollywood where all the movie stars hung out. There was a manager called me over one evening and he said, look, I've got a kid who's going to be signed by Capitol Records pretty quick, and we need a drummer. This kid's name was Tommy Sands. A wonderful young man, became a major teenage idol. And we went on the road. But it was during that time that I was with Tommy that I got to work with people like the Diamonds, who were really hot in those days, the Platters. These were shows that I was playing. Great experience. And now I was learning rock and roll, which was still a dirty word to most of the musicians.
Only you can make all this world seem right.
When I got back to L.A., there was a man by the name of H.B. Barnum. And H.B. started using me, Carol Kay, on bass and Glenn Campbell on guitar. There were a bunch of us that were sort of demo musicians, but we played rock and roll.
Usually every guy that sat down in one of those sessions in that group was a great musician. Studied, practiced, taught well, loved what they were doing.
Everybody wanted us.
Do you remember when my dad was doing the Jobim album?
Oh, yeah.
And all of the A-team was in. And at the end of that session, we were doing something stupid. And the A-team left, and our little B-team came in, the wrecking crew came in and sat down, and we cut a #1 record.
And what most people don't realize, that was her dad's first #1 record.
And we just marched on in there and made our little hit.
Daddy?
Sorry.
Then I think I'll wait until the evening gets late and I'm alone with you.
I gotta sing a little louder then. You too, you sing a little louder too.
I did Something Stupid with Frank and Nancy Sinatra, and the little lick that I played on the intro, I had already played that on another record of the song with the guy that wrote it, Carson Parks. And Frank heard it and wanted that very lick on the intro. Billy Strange was the arranger, and the guitars were me and Glenn Campbell. And Billy had just written like El Paso-style guitar for the intro. So Glenn, of course, played something real nice, but it wasn't what was on the original record. And Frank said, no, that's not it, that's not it. Let's try it. So Glenn tried something else, and Frank wasn't real happy with it because it didn't sound like what he heard, you know. So finally, after a while, I said, Glenn, I don't want to be pushy or anything, but that's me on the original record. I know exactly what he wants. He said, well, then you play it, man. Switch parts real fast, and I played it.
You want to hear the guitars just to make sure everything's cool?
One real fast start.
Letter A.
That did it.
Pretty sound, yeah. That's the whole trick of the record.
I know I stand in line until you think you have the time to spend an evening.
Chuck Berghofer, who was the star, you know, that bass line became infamous. As a matter of fact, it's probably, simple as it sounds, it's probably one of the hardest things a bass player ever has to do.
Nobody can do it.
They never do it correctly, you know, or they make an attempt at it.
The engineer came out and said, gee, I love the sound of your bass. He says, I'm going to give your name to my friend. It turned out to be Jim Bowen. And I wound up doing some dates for Jim Bowen. About the third date I did was Boots Are Made for Walking. And that put me on the map. I went from doing 2 dates in my life to doing 3 a day. Yeah, if I wasn't available that day, I'd probably be selling insurance somewhere.
That chunk, that rhythm chunky sound that was so, Lee used to call it dumb. He wanted that dumb sound. It really made the records, and it's very hard to capture, especially live.
And that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.
Lee didn't want me to do the song. I kept saying, I want to do that boots thing, that one about the boots. And he said, nah, it's not a girl's song. I said, well, it's certainly not a guy's song. He used to sing it live in his performances. And I said, it's wrong for a man to sing it. It's harsh and abusive. But it's perfect for a little girl to sing.
Start walking.
The feeling of a live session was unlike anything else, because you'd hear it back instantly, and there it was, and it was either magic or it wasn't magic.
And I never will forget when I drove to Las Vegas, on the marquee it says, Nancy Sinatra with Hal Blaine on drums. This big marquee all over the thing at Caesar's Palace. Now he's making like $2,500 a week. Now, Irv Kotler's worked with Frank, the father. He's making $750 a week. And I said,
Who said life was fair?
oh my God in hell. And then all of a sudden, here's this Hal Blaine, I just left, Hal Blaine, all over the Caesar Marquis.
What a gig.
You got to get it when you can.
Oh, Lord, it hurts to be living with a dream of a drummer man.
I didn't realize it until later, but New Orleans was a great town for a musician to grow up in. My brother and I were 12 and 13, and we already had gigs on the Mardi Gras floats. Not gigs, one gig. My mother was a singer and a pianist, and the city was raging with soldiers, sailors, and Marines coming through there to get shipped out to World War II. And the clubs in the French Quarter, they were making a lot of money and they were hiring a lot of bands. My mother had a job in the afternoon playing and singing matinee. And my father had a night gig, and I think it was the first time in their life that they were fully employed as musicians. I went to a black Catholic high school, and all the public schools were segregated. I couldn't wait to get away. My brother and I soon established a band. You know, he played piano. We mostly played blues and boogie, and we wanted to play bebop, but really nobody wanted to hear it. People would always tell me how great I was, and, you know, that boy's really going places, and of course I believed that. 1954, my brother and I moved down to Los Angeles and proceeded to starve around town for about 2 years. Made all the jam sessions. That's what you do when you're new in town, and that sooner or later gets you work, because the band leaders come to the jam sessions looking for horn players or rhythm players, and that's where they found them, at the jam sessions. The rock and roll thing was getting very big, and they needed the kind of horn I played, so it was really being in the right place at the right time. Particularly when I got on the Merv Griffin show, which started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, that's the time my kids came home from school. And it ended at 8:30 at night, and I'd get home maybe 9:30. Well, that's the time my kids would go to bed. Many days I didn't see my kids. Let's put it this way. I'm a better grandfather than I was a father.
I remember taking this picture. I took it through a record, through a 45.
These were all yours, hey. It's nice, yeah.
The first band I had was just an experiment. We opened the show for Dave Brubeck, and people went crazy for our, you know, half-hour set, however long we played. And I remember coming off stage, and Paul Desmond was standing off to the side, and as I passed him, he was scratching his head and said, "I don't know what I just heard, but I think I like it." That was the first cue I had that maybe we were onto something. A jazz musician loved it or liked it.
The first date I ever did for Herb Alpert, Shorty Rogers called me up and says, "Bill, would you do me a favor?" He says, "As a guy
He's a friend of mine. He says he's a trumpet player. He doesn't have any money. Would you do it as a favor for me? I said, sure, I'll do it.
Herb gave us each $15. It was a scab date.
Oh, well, most of them were.
Right, yeah.
When we first started way back then.
Right, it was $15.
2 for a quarter.
Yeah, two for 25. And that was a lonely road.
That was the first huge hit that Herb Alpert ever had. It was huge. He became a millionaire on that one record. And you know what he did? He went to the union, said what he did, paid the union fine, and then had checks sent to all the musicians for scale that they were supposed to have gotten and didn't.
The signature moment in Taste of Honey is when the bass drum is knocking 4 to the floor. We didn't have a way to get back to the time without, a count off. And Hal, said, let me hit the drum, the bass drum. Everyone will know when to come in. Larry Levine thought, the engineer, that we should keep that, and it was, one of the things that people remember about the record.
And it became kind of a trademark of the TJB. It was only because these professional musicians couldn't come in together.
I met Julius in high school. We started playing a song, and he took a solo, and I thought, wow, man, this guy sounds like Lionel Hampton. He wrote Spanish Flea, although his first title was Spanish Fly. And I said, I don't know, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure that title's gonna work.
When the TJB became famous and he had to create a group to go on the road, none of the studio musicians would do it because they were too busy.
We did 13 albums, and this was something that bothered me my whole life, my whole career. We'd come back to town and I would call guys like Lou and Hal, and the guys on the road, were really upset.
They were a little offended that they were not used, but, recording musicians had a certain sound that was important to get.
No matter what shape your stomach's in, when it gets out of shape, take Alka-Seltzer.
I saw a commercial, and I thought it was a smash. I called up Dave Pell, who was my supervisor, and I said, what instrumental groups do we have here? And he said, well, we have a name called the T-Bones. And I says, all right. So I got Tommy Tedesco and the boys in the studio. We went, and we did No Matter What Shape Your Stomach's In. And that was the #1 instrumental of the year.
The T-Bone!
What is their name? Willie Vanelli, or what the hell his shit is? Yeah. They had nothing over us, right? We did that all the time.
I wanted the Marquettes to be like a working group, and if the public knew it wasn't so, it would be like a mini Vanilli or whatever.
I think it's a little different when you're a horn player and you're asked to play the introduction and play the first chorus.
I can understand that.
And play the first solo and then play the fade on the end, and the damn thing comes out and it doesn't have your name on it.
Yeah.
Surfer Stomp, Plaz Johnson was the lead saxophonist, and I said, Plaz, how about calling it Plaz Johnson? And he says, no, he says, I don't want to be associated with that type of music. I mean, he was a much better player than that, but it became a hit, and so we call it the Marquettes, and then I started getting calls. So the songwriter who co-wrote Surfer Stomp with me, called Mike Gordon, he got a group together, went on the road.
Worse than not getting the money is to have to play on the hit record, which sold 1 million copies, and not even have your name on it. Well, and they go dig some white kids up out of high school and put them on the road and call them the name.
And it was quite easy for the producers and the companies to hire us to read this music and play these things down in 3 hours and get out of the studio in 3 hours than to have them come in and spend 3 weeks doing it.
We would either augment or totally replace a group. We're doing a new group, say the Association, for instance. None of them played on the record. We replaced the entire group.
These are the guys that played on Windy and Never My Love and Everything That Touches You and all the things that were in those 2 albums that I did with them. Those are all those studio musicians. It's Hal, Joe, Larry, Tommy, and those guys. I wanted to put their names on the back of the album when it was finished, and they wouldn't let me because they said, well, we don't want those kids out there that buy our records to know that we didn't play on the record.
I went out and took Brian's place with the Beach Boys. And I can understand probably why Brian had studio guys come in, because there's a lot of them would fight like cats and dogs, man. Rather than Brian to go through the hassle to get the tracks, he would hire the rhythm section to come in and do the tracks.
Well, the guys, well, they at first they were a little jealous, you know what I mean? But I explained to them, I said, you know, I want to get the best I can get for the group. And they go, well, I can understand your point, Brian, you know? So we went ahead and did it, and sure enough, the guys liked it.
I mean, that's one of the most asked questions. Well, didn't Dennis get mad? Wasn't he mad because you were doing the Beach Boys records? Dennis did not have the studio chops that we had. Yeah. You know, right. The proof of the pudding is that Dennis called me to do his album when Dennis did his solo album. I played the drums on it.
A lot of times the guys would be sitting around the studio and we didn't know that there were guys in the band. The guitar players that were in these various groups, when they realized guys like Tommy Tedesco was going to be playing, they wanted to sit around and watch. And their drummers would want to sit around and watch myself or Hal. They were there like more or less they were learning. You know, it would be something that I'd like to see too if it had been the other way around.
Terry Melcher wanted to use session musicians for Mr. Tambourine Man. I'd been a studio musician in New York prior to being in the Byrds, so they let me play on it. So my feeling was, great, I get to play with this great band, the Wrecking Crew. Of course, the other guys, David Crosby and Michael Clark and Chris Hillman, were livid. They hated the idea because they didn't get to play on their own record. We got a #1 hit with it right off the bat, but we knocked out 2 tracks in 1 3-hour session. To compare that with what happened when the rest of the band got to play, it took us 77 takes to get the band track for Turn, 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 which was also #1.
People assume that just because my dad made his living playing guitar, I can also play. For me, and some of the other kids as studio musicians, we didn't take it up as a profession. What my father did teach us was common sense.
I got called many years ago. I show up on this date, now there's 70 musicians sitting there. I'm looking, I said, 70 musicians, wow. Where I sit? And they said, over there, there's a guitar. You know, I sit there. Now I look at a part. The only problem is started at bar 95, you know, and all the rest. Now the guy starts, right? And you know what this is to me at the time? This is in a nightclub. You know, you see a chick. Hey, there she is. hey. But when he did this and there was no music, I said, oh, they're at bar 95. I knew it. Guitar, where's the guitar? Over here. We're at 95. I didn't hear you. Oh, okay. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, forget it. Let's go from 96. And they had somebody come in the next day to do it. Elvis Presley came back there a few years, and I started getting hot in records, and Elvis started using me when he comes to the coast for movies. So nobody told Elvis who to use. To that day, I never knew if they knew I was the same guy, though. Yeah. But I wasn't about to tell them, you remember me, I'm 3 years ago, I'm the guy. See, the one thing, I have common sense. I studied common sense more than I did guitar.
In the 60s, the Wrecking Crew played on thousands of recordings, but you would never have known it.
Producers made a big mistake when they didn't put the credits on the back of the albums of all the people that had played on the albums. Not only did they deserve it, but I think it was misleading.
Maybe one of the reasons they left the names off was the same musicians played on so many people's records, it would have been an embarrassment if anybody had ever listed them.
I was used to it. Because when a guy hired me with his last $25 and he had a bomb, I never give him his money back.
Right.
You know, and so I really treated it as a business. And I understand how you feel, too. But I just felt, just give me my money, and I got lost.
Everybody loves a clown, so why can't you? A clown has feelings too.
Snuffy always let myself and the Playboys lay down all the basic tracks. And then Snuff said, now we're gonna sweeten it and do some overdubs and stuff, and I'm gonna bring in the people that I wanna use. And I had no experience in this, and Snuffy had. So I said, well, great. If you think that's the way to do it, let's do it.
The drummer came in, but Snuffy let him, you know, play some kind of percussion like a tambourine. So it could say Gary Lewis and the Playboys. But it was really studio guys that made the track.
And I remember my guitar player and our keyboard player, after hearing the session musicians coming in and putting down the parts, you know, they were saying, oh my God, I never could have done anything like that.
I'll never forget working with Gary Lewis and his Playboys doing all the records.
Sure.
And I'll never forget I had one real hot lick on this one record, Spanish stuff all over the place.
Guess you could say my love was blind.
And finally, his guitar player come up to me. He says, oh, you drove me crazy with that thing. First of all, I can't play it, so I don't play it. And then everybody comes up to me complimenting me on what I did on it. I said, well, just take the compliments and forget it.
So all my guitar players played a much simplified version of it, because nobody could play that.
That was inside stuff. I think that the public at large was oblivious to the fact that there was this secret star maker machinery, that a very important component of that were these teams like hitmen, studio hitmen.
Nobody cared. All they wanted was the product. They just wanted the name and the sales. Who created it? That was incidental.
Tell them your story, Hal, about the Monkees, because the newspapers came in to talk to them, and we were in the next studio cutting their stuff, and then they were pretending that they were doing a date there in the studios.
Well, you just
Tell
told
them the
it.
story.
Well, you told the story. Did you get it?
I've never considered myself a musician. You know, to me, a musician is someone who does session work, who shows up and reads charts. And I always approached the Monkees as an actor playing the part of a drummer in this imaginary group that lived in this imaginary beach house and had these imaginary adventures. To me, that's always been what it's about. Peter does tell the story of going into some of the early sessions, and he walked in with his guitar and his bass, and they said, what are you doing here?
What's going on? Well, we've already done the track Mickey's going to sing. So what? You invited me for a recording session. He said, yeah. I said, well, what are you doing? He said, we have the record. We just need to put a vocal on it.
They said, just go home, relax.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That's terrible. That's the worst thing.
I had no idea who these guys were in these early sessions. It was my first session, and I was introduced, and these are the musicians. I was the vocalist. I remember Hal Blaine giving me some pointers in the sessions, and Earl Palmer would give me some pointers, but I didn't have to play at that point. They said, you're going to start drum lessons on Monday, and I did, and I had about a year. So by the time I had to actually play on stage live, I wasn't that bad. I mean, I only had to play our songs, obviously, and they were pretty simple pop tunes. Hal and Earl, do this stuff with one hand in their sleep. The fans, they didn't know or care. And I was like, what's the deal? This is a television show. You know, what is the big deal? But, you know, back then and even to this day, a lot of people take the rock and roll very seriously. And, you know, it's, you know, rock and roll is no laughing matter. You're not supposed to have fun. You know, it has to be very serious.
It makes sense now to me. If I were doing the project, I would do it exactly the same way. But at the time, it didn't make any sense to me. I didn't understand.
Were you upset?
Yeah, I was upset. I thought that, I mean, that was very naive. I regard how upset I was as a function of my naivete. I thought I was going to be in a recording session and play the guitar and do the things and sing the background vocals and all the rest of that. I had no idea that they had just gone and made the tracks without us.
I don't think there was any backlash to the discovery that the Monkees didn't play their own instruments initially, because everybody knew it was common practice.
I saw them in everybody's session. I remember in RCA Victor going to the Mamas and Papas who were next door, and there was Hal Blaine, and then he'd come over and do one of our sessions, and then off to do somebody else, I guess. I knew they played on virtually all the Beach Boy records. You know, we got a lot of shit for it, but I think finally, you know, some of those guys are coming clean.
Barry McGuire had found this song called California Dreamin' that he wanted to record, and these four kind of scruffy-looking two guys and two girls came to the studio because Barry wanted them to sing background parts on his record. And he said to Lou, they're a great-sounding vocal group, you should hear them sing. John Phillips wrote this song, California Dreamin'. So while the band was on a 10, Lou and I went down the hall to Studio 2 with the four of them, and John had a guitar, and they sang California Dreamin'. Lou said, what do you think? And I said, if you don't take them, I will, you know?
After hearing their vocals, their background vocals, I thought it should be their record. When I started to do the Mamas and Papas, I put Joe Osborne in that group with Hal Blaine.
And that's when Hal and Larry and myself worked together as a group for the first time. I wasn't really busy at that point. I wasn't busy as a studio player. And Hal helped me get into that area.
Those kinds of combinations of what Joe brought to Hal Blaine and what Hal Blaine brought to Joe Osborne was great.
Monday, Monday.
In the case of the Mamas and Papas, John Phillips would run the song down on rhythm guitar. At the same time, Hal would be taking notes, Glenn Campbell might be taking notes, and then we say, okay, let's run it down. They had parts in mind so that you could then edit. Yeah, that's good, let's keep it. That's not, can you try something else? But they had a lot to do with the arrangements.
Members of the Mamas and the Papas teach the song to the musicians. There is no arrangement or score. Musicians decide what they should play against the vocal. A rhythm gets going.
Producers presented the musicians with a roadmap. It was just chord symbols, and that was about as far as it went. Now, these musicians took that information and, you know, added a little flavor to it that was unexpected. A lot of times it was, you know, much more than you had hoped for.
People come over and say, did you do this? Would you work with this group? I said, I don't remember. Well, I saw your name on the album. Then I did. You know, that's because you work so much, you have no idea.
The studio play of 1999, they would, if they're not playing all the time, they would need to do what we never needed to do, was practice. All the time you're practicing while being paid.
It's funny, Earl and I were talking one time, like, you couldn't judge anybody by how much they were working because everybody's working all the time. You had to just go by how much work you turned down.
Most of us were so fortunate to have been in at the original beginnings of rock and roll.
For Christ's sake, I made more money playing rock and roll than I ever made playing jazz.
There was one point in the mid-'60s that I was making more money than the President of the United States.
I remember I used to kid Carol. I says, you realize, Carol, if I got a divorce and we could get married, and what a year we'd have of money. Between all your money and my money, we'd be killing everybody.
Including each other.
This is where we did Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. We did everybody in there. It's just an amazing place.
In my particular case, I bought an incredible mansion in Hollywood. I had a magnificent yacht. I had a gorgeous Rolls Royce. But out of nowhere, I had a wife who all of a sudden declared, I want a divorce. What? What are you talking about? I just went for a sandwich and it's like impossible to believe. And in order for her to get paid off, you sell everything you own. I had 170-something gold records, had to sell them all. The house was sold for a third of what it was worth. I had to let the yacht go. The yacht was repossessed. Never had anything repossessed in my life. It's just a shame to get wiped out that seriously. I had been working with John Denver, almost $5 grand a week for almost 10 years. And all of a sudden, that job ended. Terrible, terrible thing to have to go through. I mean, you certainly, in the realm of suicide, you certainly think about it. I was working in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I was a security guard, plain and simple. Here I went from all this money and this magnificent estate and everything else involved, and all of a sudden I was reduced to living in a clothes closet. Came out of about 23 rooms in Hollywood, and it was like the end of the world.
This was Gold Star. So this is it. This is what's left. And it was an amazing time, and it was such a historical place. They had a lot of first-time big-hit people come here and make their records. Across the street, we recorded the Captain and Tennille doing Love Will Keep Us Together. Boy, they had a #1. It was Record of the Year that year. It was my last Record of the Year. I had heard that things were picking up again, 82, 83, something like that. And then I was also getting a few calls. All of a sudden I was working again. One of the great highlights was when I was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So in the year 2000, me and Earl Palmer were both inducted. Earl was just, I can't thank him enough. Earl recommending me in the beginning, it made a name for myself. It really was that simple. I've always said, if you love your work, it's not work. We loved our work, man. That's how we could work day and night, because we loved it.
A woman's world that we're living in.
I'll never forget a session we was all doing with Don Costa. And I started playing rhythm, and he stopped and he said, Glenn, you got the lead there. And boy, I said, Mr. Costa, I said, I can't read notes. He said, well, you know the melody, don't you? And I said, yeah. He said, well, that's the melody. I said, oh, okay, great.
He would ask Tedesco, how does that figure go or this figure go, you know?
Right, exactly.
And then he would sit there and work it out, and we'd make the records, and it was always perfect.
Yeah, well, he had a certain thing that he offered that they wanted.
Wonderful ear and a wonderful facility on the instrument.
Glenn came up with great ideas. And his solos were just super. And then all of a sudden he's a singing star. Well, he always could sing. We used to kid him about, oh, he's standing up and singing now. He's going to be a big star. But he became a big star.
Well, it's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Glenn Campbell.
I mixed actually the first record, that record that he made for Capitol. I mixed that record. And it was like a really surprise to see him come in and say, I'm singing on this record. I'm going to, you know. And the record was a hit, and his vocal career was launched.
And when he got out and became a singing star, guess who he called to back him up?
That's right.
We were all there for him.
I remember Tedesco playing on, I forget what it was. He said, "You're still talking to us peons?" I said, "Well, some of them." But that was great having the guys do the sessions. You know, I knew who all the good players were.
Playing Wichita Lineman, it had a chord chart. I don't think it had any part written.
She came up with da-da-da-da-da, blah, you know. She said, how about this for a kickoff on Wichita Lineman? And she came up with that.
I am a lineman for the county.
Glenn Campbell was a heck of a guitar player, and I had this Dano bass guitar that had special pickups and bridge and strings on it and got a really great gutty sound, and he picked it up and did the solo on it. It was great. I heard Wichita Lineman at a drugstore one time, and it just brought tears to my eye because that tune meant a lot to me.
And I want you for all time. And the Wichita lineman is still on the line.
I did all that early Glenn Campbell stuff, all of it, up to Southern Nights, when he changed producers and I didn't do anymore. Glenn, by this time, was trying to record using his own band. I'm sitting in Martoni's one night there in Hollywood, and Steve Turner, his drummer, walked in. And he said, "You're not going to believe what just happened." What? And he said, "I'm just coming from a session with Glenn, and they're trying to get this kid to play some decent rhythm guitar." Glenn says, "Well, give me that big, full Al Casey sound." I said, "Does he know that I'm available tonight?" You know, but I understand he's trying to use his own band. But when stuff like that starts happening, that's a signal.
I think a lot of us felt this just might go on forever. And that was the first great shock for many of us who had setbacks in our careers and realized that, hey, this is an up-down thing.
Sports figures seem to have a 10-year period when it all happens for them. So what you get is you get the ramp up, you get 10 great years, and you get the ramp down. And the trick is to make the ramp down last as long as you possibly can.
Who would hire me at my age then to be in a rock group? They weren't doing that anymore because now the rock guys were doing their stuff and writing, which they always did, but they were able to perform it.
As Dylan said, the times they are a-changing. It just changed. New game, new way of doing it.
I don't think it was a conscious decision that, you know, these musicians play a certain way, now we better get more contemporary. In my case, it had to do with the artist, or who the artist brought with him. In the case of Carole King, she brought a rhythm section with her. She brought James Taylor on guitar.
I think the bands learned to play. It was more important for the public to know that the bands were really playing the music.
You had these groups that came up in the late 60s and into the 70s. The Buffalo Springfield that became Crosby, Stills and Nash. And these were all self-contained groups that, for the most part, never used studio musicians. And those things became huge, and that's where album artists became really big.
Well, it had a huge effect, and, you know, the singer-songwriter acts became very important to people. They started wanting bands that played their own stuff. It really had an effect on the session musicians. I kind of left by then.
We all went into it knowing it could stop any second.
It was never meant to last. It was just this like magical bubble that just kind of blossomed for a second, hung there in the air. Hal plays on 7 records of the year in a row, 7 in a row, and then the bubble pops.
It's new people, it's a new regime. We came in at a certain time when we were all new. All the new people are coming in now when they are new. Young, vibrant, playing today's sounds. It's that simple.
As the record dates with the Wrecking Crew diminished, my father was one of the more fortunate musicians. His versatility, combined with his ability to read music in seconds, led to thousands of recordings in film and television. He worked with some of the greatest composers in American music: John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, Henry Mancini, Bill Conti, James Horner, Burt Bacharach, Lalo Schifrin, just to name a few. In the 70s, my father started playing for his own enjoyment. It was the first time I remember seeing him at home with the guitar.
He got into doing seminars, and that's what he really enjoyed. He was flying around the country, and he arranged his seminars on weekends so that he could be home during the week in case there was any calls.
Let me give you what I call the creative studio guitar player. About a year ago, I got the call to do a John Denver special. It was John Denver in Mexico, and they wanted some, he was on a fishing vessel, and they wanted some Mexican music, so I gave him this. Got a call to Charlie's Angels. They were in Puerto Rico. They wanted Puerto Rican music, so I gave them this. Starsky and Hutch was in a big revolt in Bolivia, I want to show you. They wanted Bolivian music.
In 1975, my father, in jest, wrote a song called Requiem for a Studio Guitar Player.
I used to be #1. I did all the work in L.A.
Always looking to carry a joke a little further, my dad dressed up as a 280-pound ballerina and went on the Gong Show.
I used to be #1. I did all the work in this town.
You should think about what he's saying in the lyrics to his song. Don't dwell on the costume too much, because it tells a lot about the way the business in this town works. And for being a person with a sense of humor, I think Tommy's had to put up with a lot of really stupid things.
In the 50s I was something, in the 60s I was a king. The 70s come around, now I'll do anything.
It was not until I tracked these musicians down to tell their story that I fully understood Frank Zappa's words. In 1992, my father had a stroke that pretty much ended his career as a guitarist. 2 months before my father passed away, he said to me, "You know, the stroke came at the right time in my life." I knew exactly what he meant. The phone had stopped ringing, and his day as the Los Angeles Session King had come to an end. Now he had an excuse as to why the phone didn't ring. It was something he had no control over. If I learned anything from my father, it was to give more than you take. He loved his family and friends and would always help the younger guitar players. knowing it was only a matter of time that they soon would take his place, just like he took someone else's seat 40 years earlier.
Each night before you go to bed, my baby, whisper a little prayer for me, my baby, and tell all stars. This is dedicated to the one I love. 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 This is dedicated.
Everybody's talking at me. I don't hear words they're saying, only the echoes of my mind.
Memories press between the pages of my mind. Memories.
Pretty soon all my troubles will pass, 'cause I'm in shoo shoo shoo, shoo shoo shoo.
Everybody find somebody someplace.
This is the moment we've been waiting for. With 30 points, the winner today is hot dog Tommy Tedesco.
It's the little old lady from Pasadena.
It's not that easy being green, having to spend each day the color of the leaves, when I think it could be so much nicer being red, yellow or gold, or something much more colorful like that.
What do you call a trombone player with a beeper? An optimist.